It's a little video. This is actually a PSL, but the trigger assembly in the PSL and the AKM, the AK rifles are pretty much the same. There's your safety. All right, there's your disconnector. Here's the disconnector. All this here, here, and here is part of the trigger. So I'm going to reach underneath here, pull the trigger, and so you can see what's happening inside. Okay, so the whole trigger assembly, which is the trigger underneath, okay, this is the catch right here. This is the hook, trigger hook, disconnector, right? Disconnector is what resets the trigger. Now, these are the hammer springs. So you see the springs are wound around the base of the hammer here. It's got pressure on the hammer. And then they come back here and they sit over these arms on the back of the trigger assembly. And you got the pin tying it all together. So the pin goes through the receiver. There's a hole over here. The pin comes in, goes through the trigger, goes through the disconnector, and it goes out the other side of the receiver. Underneath the disconnector down in here is an upright spring, and that just has the disconnector reset. All right, so it's on safety right now. So when I take the safety off, right, you see right here, this moved down here, and it disengaged the back of the trigger assembly. So now you see the trigger assembly has a lot more travel to it. So if we take the hammer up here and we push it down, you see where it did? It caught under this part of the trigger right here. So this part of the hammer is caught under this part of the trigger. I got an old piece of leather belt up here to catch the hammer so it just doesn't fly up and hit that center support on the receiver. So we pull the trigger now. We see back here, this is free. See, I haven't put my piece between there. There's nothing holding the back of the trigger assembly. So when we pull it now, right, watch right here. The trigger, hammer, this is where they're holding together. That comes down, hammer's released and goes forward. All right. What makes it go forward is the spring pressure right here. The spring is constantly trying to push this forward. When you bring it back, and it catches on the trigger, right? So there's a piece of the trigger assembly. This is the hammer. It catches underneath here. Right, so when you pull it forward, it releases it. Now, what holds all these pins in place? Usually there's a wire that runs on this side. So this is the buttstock end. That's the muzzle barrel end. So usually on this side, over here, there's a spring in there. What we've done is replace that with a plate. See that plate right here? So it goes and it engages this pin, sits over top of this pin, and then the safety lever goes through it, right? And then your safety levers lock down because of that arm that sticks out on the inside over here. You put it in, then you rotate it, and it locks into place. And a lot of times your safety lever will hit the back of this disconnector when you are putting the safety lever down. It pushes on it, pushes it forward, and then it pops down usually. Sometimes there's some clearance issues there between that piece and the top right here. Don't ever grind this down though down here or anything to make it clear. Sometimes you can polish this up here and make it pass over a little easier. But this down here, if you were to cut on that bottom part right here, it wouldn't engage the safety and your safety may not work. It wouldn't engage the back of the trigger right there. So maybe that's clear as mud how basically an AK trigger works. Semi-auto. Now, semi-auto to full auto is way different. The full auto AK has several pieces inside that are not inside of here. You have your rate reducer. You have a little different safety on a full auto. You have a sear that's up here. You have an extra spring that's down in here. There's several different pieces that are not in this that you would see in a full auto. Anyways, that's basically it. Safety, trigger, another part of the trigger. So this trigger is basically a cradle, and then this disconnector sitting down in it, and then that pin comes through and holds it all together. Then the hammer has its own pin that goes through, and then all of that's held by this retainer plate that you can buy aftermarket and put in there. That's it.